Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
So we are here tonight to talk about diversifying the pipeline. And the reason why this topic is so important is because the data really shows right now that if your organization is diverse, then the bottom line will be positively impacted. That means you'll make more money, you'll be more productive, and you'll have better operations. And so McKinsey released a recent report, and you can look that up, and we'll send it to you after the fact, but McKinsey wrote that if your workforce is diverse, then your company is doing better. So the question we always ask is, well, then why aren't more organizations diversifying their workforce if we know, and the data shows and proves, that a diverse workforce is more productive? And the reason is because it's hard, and many organizations have questions about how to do that. So you're in for a treat tonight. Here at the School of Professional Studies, we have executives in residence, and our executives in residence are appointed by the school because they are leaders in both practice and they are thought leaders and scholars in their own right. And so we have an esteemed panel of executives in residence here to talk with us tonight about this topic of diversifying the talent pipeline, how you do it, why people have trouble doing it, what the implications are if you're an employer or a hiring manager, what the implications are if you are looking for a job. And so this panel is going to be moderated by our own Dr. Yvette Burton. Dr. Burton is the academic director of our Master of Science program in Human Capital Management. She herself is an esteemed teacher, but she also is a very prolific writer and speaker, and she has held executive level positions at Deloitte and where else have you been? Lockheed Martin and also Ernst & Young. So she represents the same profile as our esteemed panelists. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Yvette, who will introduce our panelists and moderate discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Dean, and thank you everyone for being here. This is exciting for me because over my lifetime, and especially at the program of Columbia, the students, our external partners, our faculty are committed to scholar, practitioner excellence. And really that means is keeping people honest in the gap between theory and practice. And what I'm excited about is not only the esteemed panel that's reflective of where conversations in the workforce and effectiveness have gone. You'll notice there are no long-time traditional HR experts that are going to give the traditional hold the line. This is a place for candid conversation. As you probably hear on television, in your places of employment, or having been the beneficiary or victim of workforce initiatives, you've seen the convergence of disruptors, of technology, the convergence of marketing and information science, and overlay that with the changing demographics and the tensions that you see play out in your communities on the national and global stage. And so there's a lot of ambiguity and assumptions around what increased numbers and diversity means for effectiveness and business performance. We're moving from a place where inclusion and having systems and processes that were focused on employee-centric outcomes used to be PC, and now it's forcing a reckoning of having the right talent in the right place and the right time, and to the degree an organization can tap into those diverse resources to capture market opportunities that are dynamic. And so I encourage you to have in the back of your mind questions. We have a Q&A section coming up, and leveraging all of the knowledge in the room is very much in the tradition of the program here at SPS. But without further ado, rather than and I encourage you to research the esteemed panel, I could never do them justice in the time that we have. Our goal is to have enough energy and knowledge in the room to excite you to join the conversation. But I'm going to ask my esteemed panel to introduce themselves in the context of a question, which goes to an assumption that is held by many organizations in a marketplace where when you look at, there are 3 jobs for every 1 person. In fact, there's organizations where they can't get employees to even show up for an interview. So the value proposition and the contract between employees and an organization is really much turned on its head. And a common assumption, as the dean alluded to, is that because there are a growing number of diversity in the demographics, therefore that will be reflected in equitable practices, processes that have equitable opportunities for advancement for all. And you need only look at the numerics of how many women there are to men and bring that through to see if that theory holds true in today's market. And so we're going to talk about pipeline, which requires a lot of things happening, whether it's what you hear a lot about, the brand of an organization, which I am privileged that we have people that are from the marketing functions and have an idea of what branding really means. So you have the convergence of branding, and you have the call for the organization to do things that it doesn't usually do right, which is partner across silos and lines. And so my first question from my panelists, and I will ask them to introduce themselves, their disciplines or experiences. And again, we've all either been in those conversations at various levels in the house where we've been part of performance evaluations, recruitment, attraction, the point of influence of those moments that matter where how we think and how we assess people makes all the difference in who gets that cherished opportunity or that breakthrough assignment. And so I'm going to ask all of my fellow panelists, starting with Ed, to introduce himself and to give voice to the question of what say you to the theory that because there's an increase in diversity in the available workforce, that we can rest assured that those will translate into opportunities for those in the workplace.
My name is Ed Lewis. I helped bring into the world a magazine for black women called Essence almost 50 years ago. And so I believe I was in the forefront with regard to helping establish an organization that tried to give opportunities to black women. I also co-founded a magazine for Hispanic women called Latina. So I was in the forefront of giving Hispanics an opportunity in the pipeline. I bought a business magazine called Income Opportunities that was designed to help people understand how to get into business. And so I was, in part, being United Nations with respect to income opportunities, Hispanics, blacks, and we all work together. I think it's in everybody's best interest with regard to the total population of this country is 330 million, 140 million are people of color. Blacks are not going back to Africa, Hispanics are not going back to Mexico, Asians are not going back to China or Japan. How are we going to make this idea of America work? And how we make it work has to do with making a commitment at the top and down below to make sure that people are recruited, mentored, trained to be in the pipeline, because it's in everybody's best interest if we love this country we call America.
Thank you. And I'm really, one of the perspectives that you have is not only not being in the HR function, but it's also the mystique of the top of the house. Everyone says the tone at the top, but there's often very few people get to see how the tone at the top is established. So I'm looking forward to your perspective on that as we go forward. And I know, Miriam, you have not only, I mean, you're at the perfect intersection of not only excelling in marketing, but having a focus on women and disruptive. And what do you see? You've seen a lot over the years, but do you see anything different that's happening in today's conversation, and what does that mean for women?
So thank you so much for having me. I'm Maryam Banikarim. I don't know what I would call myself now. Generally, I just say unemployed, but I guess I'm an executive in residence. I'm a recovering CMO. I guess what I would say is, I'd like to be hopeful that corporate America is going to change. The numbers have been there. I think one of the reasons I'm super interested in disruption or have been, done a lot of work around transformation is the numbers can be right in front of you, and yet people won't see them. And a perfect example of that is many years ago now, I would say like 4 jobs ago, I worked at Univision. The Hispanic market opportunity was projected in the census year after year, and yet it was impossible to get advertisers to take the Hispanic market seriously. I mean, today we're in a different place than we were when I worked at Univision, and even now there's still a big gap, right? And I remember going to clients and they would say, but I don't want those people in my store. And it was like, well, everybody buys toilet paper. I mean, I don't even understand what you're saying. I mean, I'm not talking about Hermes, right? So that conversation was real and there.
Right.
And So, I'd like to be more hopeful. I think why people don't see things that are right in front of them is something we should debate endlessly. I don't know that we're going to get to an answer. I think the difference that I see that makes me hopeful is that I think that younger generations just have different expectations than we did. I happen to be Iranian, and I always used to joke that all good Iranians should work in Spanish language TV. But, the reality is that in order to get to where we all got, I would say, and I'm going to put us all in the same bracket, so forgive me, is that we sort of had to go along, or get along to go along, or whatever that expression is. English isn't my first language, so my husband says I massacre the idioms. Anyway, so we had to do that. That was sort of the way. And I think when I look at my daughter, who's a junior now in college, they have very different expectations. And I really think that that is going to make a difference. They're not willing to work for certain companies. Her friends will say something like, one of them will be going out to a work thing and something that I think is see-through and just like I'm horrified by. And my daughter will say to her, like, that's not work appropriate. And the friend, which is hysterical in and of itself, but then the friend will reply, I don't want to work at a company that dictates how I should dress. That wasn't even a concept. It was like, you remember the bow ties we had to wear? So we've come a long way. So, I would say, I think that it will be different because it will be harder to keep and retain employees, and you're seeing that. And I wish I could be more hopeful about sort of the diversity and inclusion play that happens constantly at corporate America. What you find is that they're able to get people into the door, but they lose them along the way, and particularly as you get to the top. So the numbers look good when you look at the data, but when you delve really into the numbers, what you're seeing is that middle and senior management isn't able to actually retain them or keep them to the same degree. And that's a debate that's been going on forever, as far as I can tell. So I'm going to go with Melody Hobson and say that really it's a board level thing. If you as a board do not hold companies accountable, then shame on you, nothing is going to change. Because the constant debates that I've been at a board level where we go through the numbers, it's just like every quarter you have the same discussion in some way, shape, or form. And then you're back at it, the next quarter. And so, you know what? Everybody has a boss, and corporate America has a boss. They're called the board of directors. And I would say to you, I wish board of directors were willing to be more demanding than they are. And we've all been on boards, and the sad truth is that many boards, as we've discovered in the case of, a lot of the craziness that you've seen, like Theranos, don't always, they're not even doing the job they're supposed to be doing in terms of governance, much less diversity and inclusion. So I'll pass on to you with that.
No, I think that, the conversation about data is very important, and it's kind of the, we hear a lot about STEM. We hear a lot about the lack of diversity in STEM. And, when we talk later about IT and how bias and algorithms and enshrining bias, when you think about the tech enablement of everything that used to be manual, insights that we learned about equity and how to treat each other, and now we're outsourcing that to bots and AI. And if there's a lack of diversity and representation in coding of the algorithms, if metrics that matter and there's a lack of representation of women who are able to have data acumen, even the organizations, and Yuri, this is going to be a perfect setup for you. Yuri and I share a heritage of IBM, which studies everything that's imaginable, has gotten a lot of press about equality and advancing women and being, consistent in its values, and yet still there being, even in the most progressive multinational organization, there being room for those roles that result in, whether it be opportunities to manage a P&L, or, we'll talk about things like sponsorship. Do they work? How do they work? But Yuri, I'm really curious, as an IBMer who's seen a lot of how things transpire in the dailies at a place that's leading. And even though you weren't in the HR function, you've seen talent decisions come and go. What do you, when you hear the current discourse around these issues, how does that sit with what you've seen, and does anything emerge that makes you more hopeful? Is just the regurgitation of old conversations in a new suit?
Yes. First of all, let me acknowledge the best looking and the youngest member of the audience over there. She's both very pretty and very quiet. First of all, let me say also that I don't represent IBM here. I'm just a guy that went through a career at IBM and screwed up most of the time, honestly. I had VPs tell me, Yuri, go find a job. But I survived. As for diversity, I think I'm going to just give you my experience of, it's just very limited to IBM Research. IBM Research is a unique part of IBM. It's full of people who think they're right, and they're smart. And their job is to get an idea from an idea into a business. There's very few research labs that do that. So there's intense competition for the best people. Mm-hmm. Does that help with diversity? I think to a first order, probably. But diversity happens when people understand each other. So for example, when I grew up in my lab, there was a Russian guy, there was a bunch of Indian guys, there was a bunch of Germans, there was some Chinese guy, and there was a gentleman who was born in India who went through IBM Research and became, first of all, Vice Chancellor of a university in the UK, Cambridge to be precise. He became Sir, and then became Lord, and then became Baron. So that's a career at IBM Research, right? Other than that, though, I think it was the understanding of cultures that began to help us figure things out. For example, the Russian guy had come from the Moscow Institute of Chlorine. This guy was a bear of a man, and there was nothing that he wouldn't take on. Even though the equipment wasn't there, even though the materials weren't there, he always found a way. He taught me that don't give up so soon just because the stuff isn't there. The Germans taught me to put things in order. My first paper was with an African-American gentleman, probably the only American along the aisle, who developed a really cool idea. But there weren't many African-Americans in IBM Research at the time. As things evolved, an African-American network grew up inside the division. And most importantly today, I would say there's a women's network that is helped and monitored along. There's a big effort being put into diversity because it's clear that people who are in this business of research, first of all, in great demand. Secondly, the different perspectives they provide. And most importantly, the connections to their homes. I'll give you an example. There's a gentleman in the research division who's developed a new sensor. He's Indonesian. And the sensor is quite unique in the sense it's good for measuring tremors, earthquakes. Mm-hmm. Well, guess what? What happens in Indonesia? A chain of islands spread across 3 time zones. Who would know, right? He can communicate directly with them, establish a relationship with the physicists in IBM Research. And you build out this network. All of us here have a way to build out that network. And it's that network that provides the diversity that makes things possible. But to really be diverse, you have to understand each other's cultures and others' feelings. I will say that I am not so good at understanding a non-European culture, right? I don't know what for example, for my African-American friend, we got together quite often and began to understand his world, which was not quite the same as mine. His world was somewhat more constrained. It was more boxed by things that I didn't even understand. Mm-hmm. It was boxed in by people's immediate response. And why is that immediate response there? Because they don't know. How do we connect people together in a way so they understand each other? Mm-hmm. You know, sometimes I go on the New York City subway and I sit down there and I see people looking at me in all kinds of different ways. What I'm astounded at is how many immigrants stand up for an elder lady, right? It's a miraculous thing down there in the subway. It begins this diversity that at an academic level, you wish you had an ability to capture it. So I say diversity is important to a business like IBM Research because it's looking for the best people around the world. HR has changed a lot. From what I understand today, the parts of IBM are measured as much on the talent they acquire as on the revenue that they generate. In addition, and again, this is just what I read in the press, I have no real insights, they have these two programs. One is called PTech, where they get together with schools, with community colleges and universities to create a straight-through learning process that gets people to a job right away, right? I mean, when you come out with a communications degree somewhere, figuring out exactly what job is there for you and what fits best is not simple. But this PTech thing ostensibly helps connect that. And then there's another group which is just focused on helping people through an apprenticeship process, right? The apprenticeship process is you come to IBM, you get an apprenticeship, which is paid somewhat, and then you go through the apprenticeship focused on the needs that the company and the world has. Coders, I mean, you know, AI and coding, are you kidding? AI is everywhere. It's like a pestilence. And so, you know, what happens is these people are trained in this apprenticeship, and then they move to a job right into IBM. And I, at the beginning, thought, it's just a way to reduce the costs, right? But it isn't. They drop into the salary targets that everybody has. Here ended the lesson. Thank you.
But Yuri, in your comments, you mentioned a couple of things that are important when you think about diversity and people who are ascending, you know, the conversations that happen behind closed doors when talent decisions are made, and one is confidence and the other is network.
Yeah.
And so, you know, I was thinking about John, who's in the total rewards compensation space, and I remember in my own life, I was technically excellent, but when it came, and I could sell the heck out of any solution, but when it came to selling myself and knowing my value, I felt less confident. And I wonder, you know, John, when you look at your space, which is, you know, looking at that intimate space where people have permission to be vulnerable with how much they make and their value, when you think about diversity and people that are looking for opportunities, especially at the top of the house, where we have precipitous drop-offs. Do you see any? What do you see as an imperative to turn the potential pool to a realized pool within the organization, and people to be equipped to be confident and to make sure that they're negotiating value and not just happy to be at the table?
I like the way you teed that up. So my name is John Nixon. I'm an attorney, and I represent executives as they go in and out of companies. So when people are faced with that particular sort of flashpoint, oftentimes what you see with women, people of color, is the sense of, I don't want to offend. I don't want to ask for this because I don't want to lose the job. I don't want to appear that I'm being greedy. I don't want to appear that I'm not appreciative of this opportunity. Because oftentimes, we may be the first person in our generation who got stock options or got deferred compensation or any one of the things that you really see at the top of the house. So there's a sense of, I'm lucky to have this. That's part of it. The other part of it is the opportunity presents itself, and it requires 18 skill sets. And the woman has 9 skill sets, and the person of color has 9 skill sets. And let's be frank, the white guy has 4. Who has more confidence going into the interview? So you talk about building the pipeline, you have qualified people pulling themselves out of the pipeline because they feel that they're not adequately qualified. They feel I shouldn't push for this particular position. And this is not to beat up on our white male friends. I mean, it's just a fact. I've represented white men, white women, black men, black women, Latino men, Latino women. And I rarely have to tell a white man to ask for more money, okay, if we're being honest here. So a lot of what I have to do in counseling my clients is saying, okay, this is your value. So one of the things, I mean, not to get too deep into the weeds in law, but one of the things that's sort of a trend now is paid disclosures. And companies or headhunters asking people, well, what do you make at your current job? Well, a lot of states and a lot of municipalities have made those questions illegal because that institutionally pays women less. So you have a carryover effect of years of pay inequality. So one of the things we try to focus on when I'm talking to a client, and a client who's going to be part of that pipeline, is what is the job worth? It doesn't make a difference what you made at your last job. What is this job worth? So that is about sort of building up the supply to go into the pipeline, to say that, look, there are more people who are qualified and they shouldn't pull themselves out of the pool.
Right. That's, you know, the focus on pipeline, a lot of things have to happen right for, when you think about the life cycle in talent, which universities we focus on, you know, do we give state schools a shot, you know, to the point that Yuri made about, you know, the focus is on talent, so it's easy for the conversation on talent to equal Ivy League schools only. So you hear a lot about apprenticeships and credentializing, or do we need a 4-year degree for certain jobs, and kind of, you know, the conversation about whose jobs are at risk, and what about automation, and what does that mean for upskilling? And I wonder, you know, whether it be, you know, one of the predominant themes or awakening with organizations is the importance of brand. And the notion, you know, recently in New York City, we had World Pride. And if you were anywhere in Manhattan, you saw an inundation in Times Square of rainbows, and you could tell which of those organizations were working with their employees, that knew the products, that had the external, they couldn't make that up. And then you saw the ones that were pandering. So I wonder, you know, we have a lot of expertise in the marketing and branding, and so that's nomenclature that's making its way through for talent professionals, is having a brand that resonates with diverse demographics, their communities, their lifestyles. And I'm really keen in your perspectives on, is that a lot to have on brand? Has the role of brand and marketing shifted? Have you seen more of a focus on talent? And this is open, you know, open forum, so feel free to have at that.
I'll go first because I feel like, you know, as an ex-CMO, it sort of feels like maybe I should go. You know, I think it's an interesting thing. I think what you're seeing is a lot of focus on purpose. Right? Companies being purpose-driven, and you recently saw a bunch of CEOs sign a document. I think it's one of the things to be very conscious of, because I think people do a very good job checking the boxes, but today we live in a world where everything is public, and authenticity matters, and people smell BS like a mile away. And my favorite study of late, actually I was having this conversation up at with Rebecca for her SPS class, is the Equinox Soul Cycle story. For those of you who don't know the Equinox Soul Cycle story, it is like a case study in the making, right? Here's a brand who made its entire business on the backs of the LGBT diversity play, and Soul Cycle in particular, right? And so they were basically building their business on that, and I think people in some ways, the anger is that people felt fooled that they thought this was a purpose-driven company.
Right.
The truth is, if you dissected the history of Equinox, what you know, if you were in New York in the 80s when the rest of us were, was that, 3 brothers or 2 brothers and a sister started that company, and models used to get to go for free because they knew that guys would come work out there and pay the expensive fees to work out next to attractive, skinny women. So it wasn't exactly a purpose-driven company at its heart, right? But then they sort of figured out, marketing itself as a purpose-driven thing was a good thing, and so they started making this big noise. And shocker of shockers, it turns out that they actually weren't authentic to their cause. And then people got upset, and there was a backlash that happened when they found out that they were actually owned by a guy who was backing Trump, which was clearly against a lot of the LGBT community's interest. And I'm pretty sure the Advocate actually broke the story. Now, look, the reality is that I think that it matters and you can get caught in it. Now, how many people actually really stopped going to Equinox or SoulCycle, we're only going to know in the long term. The truth is people say a lot of things and words are cheap and actions mean more, so we'll see how this plays out. I read in The Atlantic that SoulCycle is hurting more than Equinox, and that's probably because of the way their business model operates. But I think that brands matter, and people actually turn to brands today when it's too late.
Right.
Because if you look at what happens with CMOs now, the churn on CMOs is crazy. I mean, I think it was just in the last few months where the Uber and Lyft CMO were out, 1 in 6 months, 1 in 9 months. I mean, there's nothing you can possibly do short of graft to get fired in 6 or 9 months, right? So the churn on that role tells you that the marketplace is confused about the role of marketing. And so they put it under comms, which is what they did at Uber, or they put it under sales. So you're seeing people confused about the role of marketing, and then something goes bad and they're like, oh my God, brands matter.
Right.
So I think you're gonna see this shift, but I think it's gonna take a little time.
Right.
But I think as what you experience with SoulCycle and Equinox happen, you're beginning to see, you need a brand that's resilient. And Starbucks has made missteps, but they've been able to recover because you actually do believe that they're a purpose-driven company and they have a history of it.
Right.
So, I think companies have to be careful not to try and whitewash their efforts like World Pride Day, because people are too smart and there is no such thing as internal communication. Anything you do now is public. So people expect you to be a certain way if you say you're going to be, and they are going to find out. So, it's a cautionary tale if you're going to fake it.
Yeah, and as you were speaking it, I was thinking about your history. I mean, being historical in the use of brand to represent and advance and include the voices of women, Black women, Latina women. And a lot of what we hear about that industry is the disruption of technology. Some see the opportunity, some see it as the end of the world as we know it. What do you think about that space?
A brand is about making a promise, and making a promise to deliver consistently what the brand stands for. As I said earlier, Essence next year will be celebrating 50 years publishing a magazine that celebrates the beauty and intelligence of Black women. Obviously, we must have been doing something for Black women to continue to make a decision to buy this product, because it delivers in terms of what it says editorially to the needs of women. I also started a music festival in New Orleans over the 4th of July weekend called the Essence Festival. It just celebrated its 25th anniversary. Wow. And the theme was a party with a purpose. People get entertained in the evening at the Superdome, and during the day at the convention center, we bring in well-known speakers so they get food for thought about all the things that's happening within the country. And so we make a promise to the customer, and we try to deliver that. And so when individuals are looking at corporations they want to associate it with, it is really important to try to understand, what does this company really stand for in terms of how it delivers what it says it's going to do.
And
So it's,
I mean, that's what, when you look at, there's 5 generations in the workforce, that's a key differentiator. I don't know if it was always that way, but now it's, name your organization. If you've been named as a employer of choice, now there's a level of skepticism about, have you earned this, or is this just you've bought your way in? So have you seen less integrity in staying true to the fundamentals as you've explained them, or is it
staying true to the fundamental as relates to essence?
Yes.
In the year 2000, I sold 49% of Essence to Time Inc. In 2005, I sold the remaining 51% to Time Inc., Time Warner. I got a lot of criticism for selling the magazine to a majority company. And people would say to me that, are you fearful that, now Essence is going to be run by white people and that they're going to change the voice? And I would say to them, if Time Inc. changes the voice of Essence, they paid a lot of money to change the voice. That's not why they were buying the magazine. What they wanted is an audience that was underserved. And so they wanted to continue to make sure that that voice would be heard. Essence is now under new leadership. And I am quite sure under new leadership, some would say it's black-owned again, it will continue to try to really serve, and I really mean that, serve the interests of black women. And particularly, I mean, the revolution that has taken place in this country since 1970, when Essence came into being, is the number of women in the workforce, which changed the game with respect to all the things that's happening out here. And so companies have to be attuned to the Me Too movement, attuned to the issues as it relates to the needs of its consumer, because ultimately, it's in their best interest and they're going to make more money
Right.
by doing this.
Right. Thank you for that. And just a reminder that we have a microphone and invite you to join the conversation. So if you have questions, just raise your hand and let 10 more minutes for the panel. Okay, I thought we were like, okay. Metrics don't matter. So one of the...
We're agile.
Right, we're agile, on demand. We aim to please. So one of the areas of mystique is the top of the house. And so whether you're dealing with, compensation at the top of the house or, often it falls apart in the middle of the organization and people are just not clear as to how to stay aligned and hold the company true to the promise. What are these conversations behind closed doors like at the top of the house, other than having the scorecards with the metrics that say, this is where we have the attrition, this is where our logo appears in the top 100 places to work? What type of conversations that are needle moving have you been privy to at the top of the house or not?
Well, I'll jump in on this one. There's one conversation that's defensive and there's one that's offensive, proactive. The defensive one is we have a robust suite of workplace civil rights laws. You cross those laws at your own risk. It's an economic risk. It's a headline risk, it's a brand risk, it's a reputational risk, it's a personal risk. That's a defensive posture. Boards are aware of that. The C-suite is aware of that. A proactive, offensive posture is our consumer base, be it financial services, legal services, widgets, computers, software, is diverse. They're all consumers. And when you see advertising that tries to project that brand that we discussed, when you see both hiring practices at the top of the house and diversity on boards. Now in the US, we're a little behind Europe. Europe already has EU countries, a number of EU countries have already adopted mandates on gender diversity on their boards. There was an attempt to do that in the US. It did not work. But it is something that people are conscious of. And to even go more so behind the board, there's sort of these layers of, particularly in the public company world, of proxy advisory firms who sell information to the big pension funds and the big endowments. And those pension funds and endowments, they are concerned about diversity.
Right.
So when they issue a report and they look at a board that has 12 members who are all white men, that will get them a ding. So they may do the right thing because it's the right thing to do, or they may do the right thing because someone else is watching them.
Right.
So you could rest assured that the top of the house has become more and more attuned to having it be reflective of their customer base.
Wow.
May I take this to
Sure.
a different place? You asked what's a brand. So I know nothing about brands except one, and I don't deal with marketing. But I do know something about patterns. And when I was young, there were about 1 billion people on this planet, and nobody could communicate across that planet. Today, there's 7.5 billion people on this planet, and the communication network is astounding. There's companies dealing with every aspect of a company's business. Look at Upwork. Does anybody know what Upwork is? It's about 60 million people all trying to get jobs that are made available on that platform. What I think is going to happen is we're going to see, we have these hierarchical corporations, right? But when you look at what people are doing today, they're combining, and it's beginning to be kind of, I won't say frictionless, but it's beginning to be a set of functions that you can combine and which you can tear down, just like you can do with a phone call. I mean, I exaggerate, right? But an example, the company I work for is a contracting company that contracts me out to work for others. Right now, it provides like 401k and something else. But why couldn't that company figure out what my next job would be? Why couldn't it become like a paternalistic system? I exaggerate again there, but I do see myriads of companies doing all kinds of parts of the business. So we've got these hierarchical organizations that think this is how it is all going to be. Underneath what we're seeing, a completely different approach. One final example, a friend of mine was sitting around a table with a whole bunch of new people had come, young people had come, been hired. And she was talking about something that happened in the company. And they were all sitting around the table with their phones. And she thought they were being really rude. No, they were checking to see whether what she was saying was right. And they took her up on it and said, you know, you're wrong about this. So this network is providing data. The people are working on it are not looking to work the way we used to before. But in the end, what we're going to see, I think, is these companies coming together, being connected together with IT across the world. How it all is going to play out, is it going to be good? Is it going to be race to the bottom? I don't know. But that's where it's going. And yet here we have these hierarchical companies thinking like nothing's ever changing. It's changing.
It's changing.
Can I pick up on something Yuri mentioned? You were talking about how, you know, the company has sort of a regular 401k plan, for example. And a lot of what companies are doing now is they're saying, okay, look, how do we attract people? It's not the way we did it 30 years ago when you had a pension plan, because people are too mobile in their jobs. So you have a 401k plan, and you go from company to company. The money follows you wherever you go, right? But then they realize, you know what, young people really don't care about 401k plans, even though if you put a match in for it, they don't care. So a couple years ago, a smart company figured out, well, we're going to match the dollars that they use to repay student loans. Now, I know no one in this room knows anything about repaying student loans, but assuming for the sake of argument that was an issue for you. Be careful. But assuming that was an issue for you, all of a sudden you have been directly responsive to an incentive that will help you generate a workforce that you want.
Right.
And I tell you, it has moved the needle. And from 2 years ago, it went from like this one company to now you're seeing it widespread. So as people as the world evolves, and because, you know, information is frictionless and it moves, you hear something that's being offered in Silicon Valley, it's going to be offered in Austin a week later, and it's going to be offered in, you know, Long Island City, you know, in 2 weeks.
I mean, to your point about, you know, it used to be Comp and Ben, now it's Total Rewards.
Now it's Total
and
Rewards,
I was
right.
at the SHRM National Conference of 30,000 people, and 1/3 of the participants were pet insurance.
Yep.
Because younger people, you figure how expensive it is to take care of your pet, you don't have a lot of money, and what's the most endearing? And I couldn't believe the pet insurance was a thing.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
But, you know, there's, you know, so for the sake of innovation, a lot of companies are really trying ways to accelerate. And one of the conversations that we had that was very interesting was sponsorships. Brilliant idea, failed experience. What say you? Miriam, do you have a perspective on that?
Well, I want to point something out, which is that we are spending a lot of time talking about corporate America.
Right.
And Ed is really a pioneer of what was not corporate America, right? I mean, you're sort of a millennial before your time because he really started his own business. And so you crafted something that might not have existed otherwise. And so did Christy with your help at Latina. And so I think that is something that you're seeing that's different in this generation that was before. Not everybody wants to go work at corporate America.
Right.
When I graduated from business school, all marketers, I mean, I had no idea what marketing was, so I wasn't like them, wanted to work at P&G. That was sort of like the halo.
Right.
Today, I have people call me for advice, you know, who have kids, and the kid says, yeah, I have a job offer from P&G, but I'm worried if I go there, I'm gonna be seen as too old school. So, you know, the world changes rapidly, and one of the things that's shifted is that people now have the ability at a very low increment to start their own business or
Right.
join a startup or do things in a different way.
Right.
And so you don't have to play the game in the same way that we did.
We did.
And, you know, corporate America could be for you or not for you. You could
Right.
start your own thing. And so I think that's another thing that's really changed that is available to people, which is creating your own narrative and your own journey.
Right. Right.
And so you don't have to play by the same rules that used to be in existence. And you can still opt in. And one of my big things is that when it comes to money, since we were talking about compensation, is having more people talk about it. Because particularly for women or in some cultures, money was sort of not the thing that you talked about.
Right.
And so I think if you know, now I'm part of this, there's like a little Facebook group of CMOs, or some of them are ex-CMOs. I mean, we're constantly rotating in and out of jobs, so, you know, every week it's a different story. But they'll literally post things and say, like, I'm gonna go charge for a consulting project, can someone tell me how much I should
Yes.
charge? So creating sort of a kitchen cabinet of people who can give you that kind of information really, really is critical.
Yes.
I mean, top jobs at companies are public information. You can look on a, you know, you can look in their filings and find out how much somebody at your level makes so that it's not sort of a guessing game and you're sort of going hat in hand. But there are sort of networks that you can create, and I'm a big believer that, like, we should just say things like they are so that people don't feel like they have to sort of work in the dark in this kind of a category.
Right. And do you, I mean, so if you are not empowered, so part of being able to make those networks is you know, very rarely does someone that's junior in their career even have the foresight of the value of those networks.
Right, I mean, but, you know, people have them socially, they just don't know how to think about them for their work life.
Yes.
And I think when I was at Barnard, Ellen Futter, who was then the president, actually once said to me that she had sort of a lean-in circle before that was a thing. She, in her 20s, grouped together with a bunch of different students, and each person brought somebody they didn't know. It wasn't a big group, it was like 6 or 8 people.
Right.
And over time, she became Ellen Futter, president of Barnard, president of Natural History Museum. Leslie Stahl became Leslie Stahl, but they weren't that in their 20s. And they sort of decided that they would have each other's back and sort of tell people, you know, share information. And so you can create that. It's not something that you need work to create for you. And in some ways, sometimes the people who are not closest to you are the best ones to give you work advice because they don't have sort of any skin in the game, or, you know, you might not tell somebody who's close to you how much money you make because it might be awkward.
Right.
So, you know, I guess what I would encourage everybody is not to be afraid to just sort of venture out and try different things to find the right model that works for them.
Right.
I also recommend this book that's old but was really helpful for me. It was called Life Scripts that Stephen Pollan, who passed away, was a lawyer, wrote. And he does basically decision trees. It's like, I don't know, I can't remember because it was years ago, but it'll be like, I want a raise. And then it's like a decision tree of all the different ways the conversation could go. And it was funny, for a nanosecond I was a book publisher and we published that book. And so I had lunch with Stephen Pollan and I read the book and I went into my boss and I was like, it's like a whole decision tree. It's like using the book, you know, for my own purposes. So it's just, it's a great exercise, right? And you get better with practice. And it is true that, you know, I say to people all the time, what would a white man do? It's just a good gauge, you know, because we all know what the answer to that is. And, you know, he'd be like, I'm a 4, but guess what? That job's mine.
Right. And that was, you know, a lot of people are coached, have a personal board of directors, and when you come into formal structures, their first tendency when you come in is to pair you with somebody that looks like you, talks like you, which is not how you would handle your financial portfolio. You would diversify. And so it's kind of like the same thing of, you know, being privy to, for those that don't know how to turn a conversation into a connection, into a client, that's not something you just know. You've got to be able to have the safe spaces to have that conversation. And speaking of having the conversation, I want to invite you to join the conversation. And so now that you know the fabulosity that is this panel, questions. Anybody have a question or a contribution? I know that you've been either victims or beneficiaries of some of the things that we've talked about. And there will be a microphone, and we just ask that you share your name, and because networking starts in environments like this. And so we can keep going for eons, but want to invite you to participate. We have one question. Hi.
I pause to observe that I'm a white male.
At least there's self-awareness.
I can do it. I'm a lawyer.
Oh,
That's why I did the first question. No, I did the first question because nobody else did.
That's okay. That's okay.
My question is about the pipeline, because it strikes me that we're wrestling with a chicken and the egg problem. We need people at the middle and top of the pipeline in order to see the people who are diverse at the bottom of the pipeline as excellent, as Jurij said. But we need people at the bottom of the pipeline to be there to be selected. So my question to all of you is our effort better spent diversifying the middle and the top of the pipeline, or write that off for now and concentrate on putting more diverse faces at the beginning of the pipeline?
Excellent question.
Can I
Yes.
start on this? Okay. As a member of your tribe. Part of the problem that, and I'll speak to my firm, and if you recognize this, then you can acknowledge it. Part of the problem is you bring in all these bright young kids, and they're diverse, and they're great, and they get their heads kicked in for 3 years, and they say, I don't want this. So as you're working up that ladder to partner, and that funnel it's a pretty steep funnel, and they fall off because they haven't had the mentorship, they haven't had the network, they haven't had someone who's going to take them how to go from being technically proficient to generating clients. And no matter what anyone tells you, what drives every business is business. Okay? And while you can focus on bringing those people in, to me, the focus has to be, how do we either A, keep this person, or B, adequately prepare this person so they could go to the next place that perhaps they're better suited for and rise up the chain there. I mean, a lawyer of my vintage, I've been at 4 firms, okay? Because that's what you do, okay? And, but I was prepared at each firm. So I think if people will sort of fool themselves into, and I'm not saying I'm not accusing you of this, but they'll fool themselves with saying, oh, well, look at all these great young people we brought out of law school or out of business programs, and not ask the harder question, how many of those are still there in 5 years?
I'm not an expert in this category, but I'm telling you, I've seen it, like, I won't name which job because I've had a million, so you won't be able to know. But the numbers are good at the bottom. They're getting better at the name of getting them in. What they're not as good at is keeping them and moving them up. And so you have to solve that problem, because guess what? If you can get the right people and move them in and move them up, they'll help bring other people up, right? And so what we've been good at is saying our numbers are good by just improving the bottom, and that's not really the long-term win.
Right.
Thank you. That's a really interesting perspective.
Thank you. Hi.
I just want to build on your question and just point out that often our conversations around diversity tend to be framed as either or instead of yes and. And it's just an observation that we rarely, we'll post things like, well, do we want to hire this person because they're diverse, or do we want to get a great candidate, as if the two are mutually exclusive. But also your question also, you know, do you have to fill the pipeline on the bottom or focus on the top and middle? Why not make it a multi-pronged approach?
You know, one thing I just want to point out, which I notice on, you know, I have more time, so I get to read more, but more and more people will say things like, I won't actually hire this agency if they don't have, like, a diverse workforce, right? Like, there's many different levers that you can actually play. And you're seeing that now in Hollywood too, where people are actually standing up and saying, like, I'm not going to work on a movie if that's sort of the way that mix is. I think you're going to have pressure from all sides. I mean, we all know it's good for business. It's just not been enough to actually move the needle, right? So I would say the number of times I have I have an open job and people just constantly bring the same people over, and you just have to be like, I will not look at candidates if you don't bring me a diverse slate. Like, don't bother coming to the table, you know, Spencer Stewart or whoever the headhunter is. I mean, you have to have people who are really demanding.
And once you get them there, you have to treat them fairly. I mean, to give you a real quick example, the sequel to Crazy Rich Asians is in production now. Okay? So there were two writers, white man and an Asian woman. The white man was offered 10 times what the Asian woman was offered to participate in that project. So she walked away from it.
And guess what?
She should
It came out.
And it came out. So now they have a real brand problem.
Yeah.
Yes.
They have a real brand problem. So, you know, you have to get them, bring them in, pay them.
There's a
Absolutely.
gentleman right there.
Hi.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Keith George. I'm a graduate of the School of Professional Studies.
Bravo!
But interestingly, one of the questions that I notice on most job applications is whether if you want to declare your race. And I always struggle with that because I feel that maybe if I answer correctly, I might not get the job, and I would generally audit. I don't know if it's a way that firms are trying to diversify or whether or not they're trying to discriminate. So
That's a really good question. And generationally, I mean, there's a generational overlay. Just a quick conversation when I was a vice president for Lockheed Martin and their Workforce Solutions and Intelligence. There was they used to have this, you know, STEM versus diversity, and then when the circles overlapped, there was a Black Engineering Award, and there was the Engineering Award, and I actually had a fair amount of Black engineers that said, I don't want that award, I want an Engineering Award. And so there are a lot of people, and I see them on the applications for the admission cycles of people from different countries and different categories that are still not trusting of what checking that box means, or see the irrelevance of the box entirely. So I think that's a really good point. But do you have a perspective, my fellow?
I thought I saw Ed leaning forward.
My first career was at the then First National City Bank, now Citi. And I was one of 5 blacks working at First National City. But I always thought that one could work in corporate America and also be who you are. I knew that I was a Black American. I had no illusions about that. But at the same time, I also knew that I'd be able to navigate within First National City Bank. And so one does not have to lose one's identity in order to be able to, I think, succeed in working in corporate America. So I really would encourage, own up who you are. You can't get away with that, and be proud of it. But also be able to speak out when you see injustice. Don't be fearful that what the consequences are going to be. When I started at Citibank, there was a division of the bank called Financial Engineering, fancy name for credit analysis. We saw the graduates from Harvard, Wharton, all go into this division. And so my other black colleagues and I, we said, we need to go in that division too. Now, this is 1966. And we decided to go talk to the powers that be, 3 of us, and we asked that we'd like to see us go into this particular division because we see the graduates of Harvard Business School going in. And many of my other colleagues thought we had lost our minds. Aren't you fearful about losing your job and whatnot? So one of my colleagues went into the division. I mean, the bank was receptive. One of my colleagues went into the division. I was second to go into this division. And when I got into this division, I said, oh my God, what did I get myself into? I couldn't understand the nomenclature, but it was really about credit analysis. I learned the use of the computer doing cash flow analysis for companies 1 year, 25 years, 30 years out. And I saw my colleagues. I was the only black, no women. This is 1967 in this division. I saw my colleagues come in at 6:30 in the morning and work all day long. And I said to myself, I am not going to let my white colleagues think I'm inferior to them. So I said, I'm going to start working at 6:30 because I'm going to understand this. And I was able to overcome, understand, and when I sold my business, for example, a number of people asked me, Ed, did you accept stock from Time Warner? I said, my name is Ed Lewis. Cash is king, queen, jack, and everything else. And I learned the importance of cash by doing these cash flow analysis and working damn hard with respect to what's important.
So we have time for one more question, and I'll defer to the lady in the front.
Hi, my name is Zara.
Zara.
Just want to thank you for your thoughts. My question might appear a little bit long-winded, so I'm just going to read it off my phone and thinking about it for a little bit of the session. One of the things I've been thinking about is that when a person of color Thank you so much. When a person of color breaks through an Ivy League institution or a mid to senior level position in a company, they often find that they are in predominantly a white space. And a person of color, like John mentioned, doesn't necessarily want to jeopardize what they've been given, so they'll move through that space quite gingerly, cautiously, head bent down, quietly. And I think if this is the reality of the situation, and we know it's the case for many, one might say that part of the issue of retention is a systemic problem, where smart and talented people of color are being hired under the auspices of diversity, but once they arrive at their organization, they realize that the company may not actually be equipped to address their specific needs and may not be equipped with the kind of language that generates things like race consciousness, which is a relatively new term. It's worth thinking, I think, of programming initiatives that companies and organizations can go about introducing that would support people of color's needs in the workspace and help them feel safe in their organization so that they can be their most productive selves. None of this is new to us. And so I think in some academic spaces we have the idea of listening circles, healing circles, designated safe spaces, but I'm not really sure if that kind of jargon is present in corporate spaces. And so I guess my question is, what are some systemic or structural programming initiatives that we might be able to think of putting in place that we could imagine that maybe don't currently exist? And what could that look like?
Oh, that's an excellent question that's going to serve, and thank you for that question, that's going to serve as an opportunity for what I had in mind as, for those of us, it's a multiple system, it could be all system failures and how it feels on your skin to feel that all the hours that you're dedicating towards something that you're not working extra. There's internal ceilings as well as actuals. And one of the things I wanted our panels to leave us with and to invite us to continue the conversation amongst each other is, how do we realize the dream and the promise, since it is a multiple system effort. So I guess if you were to give your advice on what we all need to do for those of us that are dedicated in making a difference and making sure that this is not the conversation in another generation, and I'll just ask Ed to start and maybe move down, what would be your maybe 2-sentence call to action for making a difference in this space?
sometimes when we get in these positions, we're fearful about helping our brothers and sisters. I remember for 15 years, we tried to get business out of Procter & Gamble. Could not get them to advertise in a magazine. It wasn't until they hired an African-American male to be in charge of all the worldwide advertising, who made a decision that I'm going to make sure that black media at least gets a fair chance. After 15 years of the business, that's why we started getting advertising in Procter & Gamble. So when we get in these positions, we can't be fearful about if we help someone of color as we continue to move forward. It's about having the self-confidence about yourself, who you are, and wanting to make a difference.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to build on Ed's point. I think I became more conscious of the need to bring others along as you got more senior. I mean, I just didn't see myself through any prism, even though obviously I was a person of color. I mean, I didn't check any of those boxes because Iranian isn't a box that actually is available. But I mean, I just think you just have to be conscious of what's happening around you and how can you look around you and not be somebody who stands up. So in the end, you have to look at yourself in the mirror and be okay with that person. And for me, it's like I had Tourette's at 20. I spoke up even then. So if you're going to hire me, you're going to hear a lot of different opinions. And for sure, I'll be speaking up about things like that because I think it matters. And I think it matters because it's good business, not just because I think it's about pandering. And I think the more senior you get, the more demanding you have to be from whatever seat you are. Now I sit on a board. I remember I was at a board meeting. I'm the only woman, and they sent out a sheet that said, women wear this for the photo shoot, men wear this. And I showed up and I said, why don't you just call it Miriam? There was kind of dead silence. You know, I mean, I do it with a joke and a smile. I'm not trying to be, you know, I'm making a point without it being totally awkward. But I think it's my job I think it's my responsibility to make a point. And I just want to build on Ed. For me, I think you have to, I mean, it's a very high price not to be your authentic self. So I say to people all the time, if you have to really compromise who you are, that's a really, really high price that you're paying. And I'm not willing to do that. I'm just not willing to do that. And I counsel people about not doing that because you think it's okay, and then the price you end up paying just sort of plays out in other parts of your life.
Right. Awesome.
Yeah, to just follow up what you asked us. First thing I would say, just don't give up. I mean, I know it's easy to say that thing, but persistence wins 100% of the time, from what I can tell. The second thing is, and I noticed this more recently at IBM, there are certain people at high levels, high executive levels, who are assigned to deal with very specific issues. So if you, for example, the Women's Network has somebody at high executive level, so when you call that person, you say, look, I think something's not going right here. That person can take and do something with that issue. So Ed, you know, you said have a person in the company who is from your race or from your group. I think having a person like that in an executive position that can make things happen and say, hey, this isn't right.
Right.
That's what I think.
It's a good one.
I think we all know that person who gets by on flash and BS and doesn't substantively understand either the business or what is supposed to be their technical skill. If you understand the business you are in and you understand your technical skill, that gives you a certain power. That power may not exist at that company, but that power will exist in the marketplace. Okay? Now, this is the advice that I would give my daughter. Be good at what you do and like what you do. And then don't be afraid. Because if they don't value you there, someone else will. Okay? And then you really kind of talk about being your authentic self. When you control the bottom line revenue, when you are adding to the P&L, you could be yourself. That's how you get to be yourself.
The power of green is the ultimate color. Please join me in thanking our esteemed panel.
Thank you so much, Yvette, and our amazing panelists. I have to say, I feel incredibly inspired and proud just to be listening to you and the expertise you have. Thank you, everyone here today, students, alumni, faculty, guests. We very much appreciate your participation in the community at the School of Professional Studies. We hope you will stay engaged as alumni, and we hope that you will join us not only for the reception following this event, but also stay engaged in other ways and support the work that we're doing, specifically in launching a Center for Educational Access with a focus on the Center for Future of Work. Part of the mission of it is equity, and one of the pillars of research is diversifying the talent pipeline. And we hope to host more events like this in the future where we're able to feature great thought leaders and practitioners coming together to talk about these specific areas and impact the work across these industries and organizations. If you want to talk about this further, you can find the dean or myself or some of our colleagues from the School of Professional Studies to talk about how you can continue to get engaged and support and help us in donating for the center. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Hey.